Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. Hello, mate. How are you?
Oh, mate, I'm all right. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm excited.
Got some good trades. We've got some, I'm excited too. Yeah, sort of looking at 2022 already.
Yeah, look at you. Well, there's only one way to go for your team, mate, and that's up. So
yeah, we've got one more step down the ladder if we
Well, we could only hope. But as we pivot to a bunch of other sports in this country. But I'll tell you why I'm excited at the moment, Ben, is we are recording this in mid-October, which means we are in the shadows of summer. And what does that mean, Ben, on the Property Couch when we're in the shadows of summer? It means we get super excited because we can put a call out to, you might recall at the end of the summer series this year, you and I said to our community, Ben, we would love you to double down, tighten the belt, understand how to do money smarts, trap more surplus, and then have a story that you can share with the community. So today is a shout out, Ben, to say to those folks, we want to hear from you. If you answered that call back at the beginning of the year, then got inspired by our stories through winter series whilst you were up there sunning yourself up in the north of Western Australia, we certainly want to hear from you. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/my story and go and leave your details, Ben, we want to hear from you. We get excited.
That surplus cash, life-changing story. And then what did you do with that surplus cash in terms of making it work harder for you? There's some ideas. We want to learn about the stories of how much you could have saved based on looking at essential or discretionary. We want to have a look at whether that meant that you're able to get into your first investment property. Whatever that looks like, that's part and parcel of what makes the summer series so great, is those personalised stories. And of course, the transformation of mindset around you controlling money versus money controlling you. You get over that line, you're unstoppable at that point because basically you build new muscle memory in the new space and you take action, build those habits. They're the stories we want to hear from.
They are, Ben. And what I want to do is, if someone's just listening to this right now, they're on a treadmill, they're walking, they're cycling, they're in their car, they're doing something, they just popped into their mind. And then all of a sudden they've gone, oh, I'd like to tell my story, but that's not for me. I want to talk to that person right now, because Ben and I pride ourselves on making sure that if you come and join us on this podcast, we will move heaven and earth to make you feel comfortable. You do not need to be comfortable speaking in front of an audience. There will only be you and I. It'll be on Zoom or online, Ben, largely. So I just want to reassure the person who's thinking, I reckon I've got a story to tell, but I'm too nervous. I want to hear from you. I promise you, Ben and I will make you feel comfortable. And I promise you that your story is more powerful than you probably think it is right now, because there are so many people listening to this podcast who would love to get in control of their money. And they think, oh yeah, it's easy enough for Ben and Bryce. Well, no, the people who listen, put the frameworks into place and then actually go through it. Because when, as we've said a number of times, Ben, you will go through the messy middle. You get all inspired about doing it and you'll see the goal, but then you'll set it up. You go to the 7-day float, and the first 7-day float, you'll probably fail. You'll probably overspend. And so those are the bits that we actually want to hear. Yeah. And what's the adversity that you went through to make sure the third week of the 7-day float, you actually landed it. And then the fourth week, it felt like you got some muscle memory around it. And then the fifth week, it felt like, oh, this is pretty normal. They're the things that actually make the message so powerful. And it's one of the reasons why everyday people who listen to this podcast, we want to get them on, Ben.
Awesome.
So folks, thepropertycouch.com.au/my story. The Stig, you'll get to chat with the Stig via email, which will be exciting in itself. But she will help you determine whether you can come on and share your story. But I just want to say it's for everyone. It's not for, there's no benchmark here other than you've got a pain story that's turned into a pleasure story by implementing the framework. So I can't wait to chat with you. Ben and I both get very, very excited at that time of the year. Also, a quick shout out, if anyone ever wants to be involved with the Property Couch, Ben, we have an opportunity right now for a copywriter / journalist to form part of our team to help creatively express
our story.
Yours and my story, in the written word. So if you think that's you, I'm going to leave a link in the show notes. We definitely want to hear from you. If you know someone who has a journalist background or a copywriting background, send them a note, let them know. We would love to chat with them and get them on board because it's a fun place to be around on the couch, Ben. There's plenty of spots for great guests on the Property Couch, but there's also a spot for a wonderful, talented person who wants to be part of our team. So Q&A day today, Ben. We haven't done this for a while.
I'm looking forward to it, mate. Yes, looking forward to it. Got some great questions.
We had Nerida, we've had Leah, we've had Todd, we've had some great guests since we've done our last Q&A, but it'd be fair to say we love riffing it around this sort of stuff. So before we get there, the Mindset Minute theme today, I like this. I stumbled across it, Ben. I really like the idea that this could percolate in a lot of people's heads this week as they lead into, in some places in New South Wales, they get some freedom. But the problem is rarely the problem. 99% of the harm is caused in your head by you and your thoughts. 1% of the harm is caused by reality, which actually happens and the outcome. So most of the time, the problem isn't the problem. The way you think about the problem is. So, for example, have a think as you let that land. Have a think of something that was occupying your thoughts last month that was really causing you distress or duress, and then think about it now as you reflect in the rear vision mirror and go, how much of it was in your head and how much of it was actually reality? Because if we actually did take the time to do that after action review and think back in the past and reflect, and a lot of people do this through journaling, Ben, you will find that statement has never been truer, that 99% of the problem is in your head. So folks, the problem is rarely the problem. Most of the time, the way you think about the problem is the problem. So there you go.
I like it. And framework for that, story, state, strategy. Jamin phrases like, if you can change the story, then potentially you can change the state of mind and you can execute and move on. So I love it. Love it.
Well, he talked about the monster under the bed when we were little kids. You remember that story? And he goes, we're actually never afraid of the monster under the bed. We're afraid of the thought of the monster under the bed. So because there was never a monster under the bed. So
correct.
There we go. All right. Let's rip in. Today's first question is from Mark. Left a message on SpeakPipe, and the question is about buying in COVID lockdowns. Let's have a little listen now.
Hi, Bryce and Ben. My name is Mark. I'm currently looking for a home in Melbourne to live in. Over the last month, because of COVID, you haven't been able to inspect any properties. However, in the last month, there's been about 4 properties in the same suburb that have sold sight unseen for about $50,000 to $100,000 above asking price. Is there any way you can explain this behavior and give me any advice on how to compete with these people? Thank you.
Buying in COVID, Ben. Imagine that.
Tough. I mean, people, I saw a purchase in a property in Greensborough, Bryce, where I'm like, whoa, that was a little bit higher than I expected it to go. And they couldn't get to see the property other than the videos. Now, the video showed the property in absolutely terrific condition, but I'd actually had the privilege of going through that property. And I knew how big some of those rooms were. And so that's where it becomes challenging in terms of how do you get a true feeling for a property just through a video. Now, of course, some of these video packages now, Bryce, 3D, you can walk around, look at the roof. They're all high definition. There's some incredible understanding you can get of a property, but there's still an element of being able to get the feeling and walking around and workshopping that property. So I get the challenges around sort of buying during COVID, but it still comes back to the fundamentals of there's a huge amount of demand out there. And there's people who are competing on a FOMO basis, Bryce. So I reckon this is your wheelhouse, mate. This is, as a buyer's agent that's bought in every state and territory in Australia, you're the man to answer this question.
Well, there's a couple of things here. There's a few clues in this question, Ben. One was looking for a home in Melbourne. All right, so we've established where they're looking, and then it said sight unseen for about 50 to 100,000 above asking price. Well, let's be really clear that in Melbourne, that is the norm. That is the norm. So price guides going over. We always talk about prices in terms of X, Y, and Z within our buyers agency team. So the X price is the price that you would pay if there was you like the property and you were pretty much competing on your own and you buy it, and that's a bit of fiction at the moment. Y is the price that you pay when you go, all right, under competition, I think it's probably going to go a bit further, and this is what I'm prepared to pay. And then the Z price is really the stretch price. You go, oh, okay, there is strong competition in the market, and I'm going to need to stretch. And if it sells for $1 more, they can have it because that's my walkaway price. That's where I've really stretched, and it hasn't put me into a position of distress. Well, across the country, Ben, we've been buying at Z pretty much for the last 10 months.
Yeah.
So X and Y's aren't even part of it. So my first suggestion to Mark is get very clear on the sold tab within the portals, because that is your first free source of information about where the market is at, and then be very clear on doing your research around what it sold for and what the asking price was, so that you can start to build a bit of a picture. Because some particular agents are close, some particular agents are notorious. So you need to build up a bit of research around that. So that's my first point. Secondly, mate, I went for a walk with one of my mates around my local area. He's a prominent real estate agent here. And I love asking him stories about, I'm obviously in the Surf Coast here, Ben. And he says, look, we've been selling properties sight unseen just using FaceTime. So the buyer up in Melbourne and I just walk around FaceTime showing them. So people are being very creative, because the situation that we find ourselves in is very, very low listing volumes for quality properties across the landscape. So people are thinking, well, I'm in lockdown, and as soon as we get out, there'll be a big flurry. So I've got to look outside the square, and how am I going to do that? I think I've told the story where I've got a prominent real estate agent lives next door to me, and he's saying they had a deal wrapped up at one price, and then by the time a Melbourne buyer got involved, it jumped $600,000 in the day, and they were ready to wrap it up in the morning for $600,000 less. That Melbourne buyer bought it sight unseen. So buying in COVID lockdowns, Mark, it is important to understand that you've said, how can you explain this behavior? Very simply, scarcity of listings means people are doing desperate things and they're doing whatever it takes. Now, I want to be really clear. I don't think you should buy a property sight unseen. We don't buy property. I've never personally bought a property sight unseen. We don't encourage clients to buy property sight unseen. What we do is we have a proxy in some cases, which is a human who has walked through the property, who doesn't have any conflict of interest with the agent, to make sure that they're representing the true picture. Because clearly the agent can make sure that you only see what they want you to see through even that FaceTime. So it's really important that you've got yourself or a proxy who doesn't have any conflict of interest with the vendor to actually see it for yourself. But understand that is the environment that you are in. You've got people who're missing out 2 and 3 and 4 times. And I'd like to suggest you circle back to our Buying in a Hot series that we did at the beginning of the year, Ben, because and last week when we chatted with Leah, she was actually giving you some insights on what some of the agents need to do to actually get people through the private inspection. So, Mark, this is the game at the moment, and it is the reality, and it's not going away anytime soon. People are being creative about buying. People are breaking my number one rule of they are buying sight unseen because they're desperate. Interest rates are low. They're pre-approved. They want to move, and they're being checkmated. So hopefully that helps you. I think the Buying in a Hot series is really going to set you up. That was pre-lockdowns when we did that series, Ben. But if you listen to that in consultation with last week's with Leah, merge them together, get some things. But in summary, buying over the asking price is normal. So don't be seduced by that. And two, people are being really creative on how they're buying in these times, Ben.
Good question, Mark.
Yeah, it was a good question. And let us know how you go. Hopefully that's helped. And you're not alone, Mark. There's plenty of people feeling the same way about you. You will get some insights in that Hot Market series to help you understand it. The Stiggy will leave a link in the show notes so you know exactly where they are. They're at the beginning of the year, this year, and that will certainly help you. So good question. Let us know, Mark. And good luck getting into the market for anyone else who feels the same way about Mark as Mark's circumstances as well. All right, next one is from Tracy and questions to ask agents, Ben.
Hi, Property Couch team. Thanks for the podcast. It's really driven myself and hubby and has given us the confidence to buy investment property. So much now that we're looking to buy a second one, and this one looking at the Gold Coast. My question is, I have a good handful of properties that I'm looking and interested in, but they're nearly all at auction, and I live in northern New South Wales. When contacting the real estate, what are the first best questions to ask when you can't go to view the property and you want to see if it's in your price range? Thanks again, Tracy.
All right, Ben, second investment property on the Gold Coast, living, in my view, in the centre of the universe here in Australia, northern New South Wales. I think if the planet's ever lined up for me to live in northern New South Wales, I'd be super excited about that. So, what do you think here for Tracy?
Well, obviously the first one is getting a sense of the motivation of the seller. Mm-hmm. That is the fundamental one to get a sense if it's a urgent sale, if it's a sale that requires pressure, because what you're trying to look for is potentially terms and conditions that will meet the interest of the seller. Okay, so if you know that it's an investment property and they just want to get out of it, they've got other plans. Well, the logic is that they're going to sell the property. Okay, they might change their mind, but you're trying to get pressure. If it's a divorce or a deceased estate, those Ds that we talk about, then ultimately you're also then saying, well, this is most likely going to sell. Like, it's a very, very high probability. If it's an owner-occupied property and they're looking to upgrade or downgrade, they also need to potentially find a property to live in as well. So potentially settlement terms can be all part of that. Now, we understand that Southeast Queensland are learning the art of auctions for the first time. We've always said we don't understand why, in a seller's market, you wouldn't go to auction on behalf of the vendor, because you're going to get that irrational exuberance, especially when the market is as hot as it is across the eastern states and really around Australia. So for me, that's the first step in terms of the motivations of the vendor, is what I'd be looking for, Bryce.
Yeah, the bit here that I want to dial in to, Tracy, is at the end when you said, and I want to see if it's in your price range. Let's just help everyone who has limited experience with negotiating properties. Anyone who's negotiated with intermediate or advanced level knows this, but this is a message for the beginners. Do not go to the real estate agent to get your intel about price, because you will not be you'll be misled. Their goal is to not give you price feedback. Their goal is to try and get the best price that they possibly can from the vendor. So for me, I can't stress this enough. I answered it in the same vein on the first question. You need to independently get a sense of what the price is. Now, I know it's challenging. And when you're doing this for the first time and it's overwhelming, I get it's challenging, but you just need to know that the real estate agent works. They don't get paid an hourly rate. They get paid on success. And that success is actually in the benefit of the person selling. That needs to land, because then you will stop ever going to a real estate agent and saying, can you direct me on price? Where do I need to be? All that. You need to know that independently. And you do that by looking at your market, you understand. So if you're about to buy a property in a certain market, I'm going to suggest you need to have a couple of intense weeks in the lead up, understanding the value in your suburb. I mean, one of our buyers agents, Ben, if they find a property, they will spend a couple of hours minimum doing price research. A couple of hours minimum for people that have got 10,000 hours of experience. A couple of hours. So if you haven't bought a property for 6 or 7 years, this is their second one, so I don't know what the thing is, but I'm talking generically here. If you haven't bought one for a little while, you've got you've got to get up to speed, and you've got to get up to speed quickly. So for me, to answer your question, what are the best questions to ask the real estate agent. For me, it's not about price, because you need to do it independently and they're not going to tell you anyway. For me, it's about how do I build a relationship with the agent so that they're prepared to give me as much information as I can about the very thing that you talked about. I want to know the vendor's motivation. For example, will the vendor be okay selling to an investor, or is it their home that they've owned for 40 years and they can't stand the idea of someone coming and bowling it over and building 2 townhouses? They want to have it to a nice family so they can enjoy that's it. That's information that you need to know. And the agent's not just going to give it to you. So you have to ask questions in a way that gives you a sense. So building rapport, what are they looking for outside of price? What's important to them? Would they accept a long settlement? Because if you ask them questions that, to be honest, come from experience, would they be prepared to do a really long settlement? The agent might go, oh, no, they need the money quickly. Like, they're not always going to do that, but you're trying to find the angles to find out what's going on for the vendor. So my advice to you, Tracy, is to ask as many questions as you can about how you can get to find out the vendor motivation. There is no formula. Unfortunately, there isn't a formula. You've just got to be skilled in understanding how to build relationships with agents. So I'd recommend you go back to the Todd Sloan interview that we had a couple of weeks ago about how to build relationships with agents. But here's the thing that I think you really do need to know, particularly if you're in northern New South Wales, you got to cross the border, get into to these privates or these inspections, is you need to know what the rules of engagement are. Most of our team are constantly asking what the rules of engagement are. This is going to auction in 2 weeks, but do you think it will go to auction? And if it doesn't, how will I know that I'd be going to be one of the calls that you make to make sure I'm interested? The rules of engagement in the current environment are critical. You need to know what they are. So we could be, we could have a client and we'll say to them, hey, look, it's going to auction this Saturday, but be prepared for it to change on a dime. Be prepared for us to call you on the Tuesday before and say, it's just heated up and we've got to put in an offer by 5 o'clock this afternoon, because people are doing stuff right now, Ben, as you well know, that is, it's 1 in a 50-year event that we're experiencing right now. People are trying to jockey for position like they never have before. So therefore, you need to know that if you're in the game, because you turn up at the auction on Saturday and you realize it sold 4 days earlier, that's not a great position. So do not go to the agent trying to give you guidance on price. You will be definitely disappointed. You need to do it independently. You go to the agent to let them know you're interested, build a relationship as best you can, find out as best you can to find out the vendor's motivation, and you make sure that you know what the rules are for this particular deal, because there are no general rules of thumb right now, Ben.
No, and if you can't get to the auction, then the next best option is having someone who you can identify in your family and friends network who are calm and collected and are confident public speakers, because you want them, if you've got them on the phone and you're giving them instructions in terms of how you want to bid, remember, it is street theatre. You want that person to feel confident, calm and collected in terms of doing your bidding for you. If that is not an option and you are still super keen on the property, then talk to the agent about, they will always have other representatives there. And it does happen from time to time where you will have one of the selling agent's assistants who can put your bids in on your behalf. And that can also look quite interesting when you're in an open environment where the auction's happening, if it's a public auction and not an online auction, because all of a sudden someone's in the same suit or the same uniform and is putting bids in there. And so that can scare off newbies in terms of who's this person that this person's bidding for. So there is that element in terms of if you're desperate to execute or you're desperate to bid for a property that you really like, they are some of the options you've got. Hey, Bryce, I also wanted to talk about, if I can, it's probably not a bad opportunity. I'm doing some research for us at the moment, as you know, on a potential new market, right? And so coming back to your point around the research that's getting done. So yes, I've got obviously the sold portals. Now I'm in a slightly better position. I've got a lot more data at my disposal, but I still want to teach you how you can potentially look at technical fundamental valuation. So this is good for our community to understand this. So it's not an exact science. It's really important to understand that. So with that in the background, this is the work that I've been doing, and I've done now about 6.5 hours, 7 hours of research in this particular pocket of the market, and it's an entry-level market. I'm now getting down to the granular understanding of land size and also internal living spaces. So let me give you an idea. You can have a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom internal living area where the property's 114 square meters, and you can have a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom property where the internal square meters is 135. Now that basically leads to the idea, when you look at the floor plan, that there's potentially 2 living areas. And so then you're looking at, obviously, the land content is king. Remember, we talk about land to asset ratio. We want that hovering above the 60% ratio in terms of, in fact, in some markets, we want to be buying basically land, and we get the property as a bonus.
Or the house in.
The house just gets thrown in on top of it, right? The improvements are thrown in on top of it. And that's where you then go back to, information that a valuer would look at, and a valuer would look at land, comparable land, and then comparable house, and then inferior and superior dwellings. And so you're starting to put all of that together. And you literally, if you're new to this, you would have to spend sort of 20 or 30 hours in then starting to get the psychology of, okay, I think this is going to go in this price range. And again, you'll never get perfect, but you'll start to get better at being, rather than in a 10% range, you'll start to bring it down into a 5% range. Now, in markets like we're in at the moment, it can go between 5 and 10% because of exactly what you said, the Z pricing range. It can go like that in a FOMO market, but they are the fundamental things you're looking at. So you're starting to get a grasp of, then you're obviously from the location, you're also talking about, okay, this one's in a court, so no through traffic. This one's on a busy road. This one's got an irregular shaped block. This property floor plan is not livable. It's got the bedroom right next to the kitchen, or it's got no ability to open up the back of the house for future improvement of those land. When you get all of those types of things flowing through, you can start to get better at predicting price, and you can start to get better at looking at where you potentially can add value and equity harvest. So it's been fun for me. I haven't done this for a while. So, I'm sort of back in the groove, back in the game, and I've been really enjoying it. But it's also, new markets. I'm looking at demand supply ratio. That's my first thing that I look at when I'm looking at that particular market. I'm looking at price points. I'm looking at age of property. Remember, I want to buy older properties with a good parcel of dirt that I can also do something with in the future if I need to, because I can then, as we say, turn apple into apple pie. So that's just a little inkling in terms of how you can do fundamental research as part of your price searching endeavors.
I think what you've highlighted there, Ben, is an important point, that real estate is complex, and I've been helping people buy since I first started getting in the game in October 1998. So I'm about to approach my 23rd year, if I can do my maths. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning. You and I sharpen the saw each and every time we have conversations about the markets and what we're looking for. And I must admit, I'm past my 10,000 hours, but I'm still trying to get sharper and sharper and sharper all the time. So that's the important thing for you to understand, Tracy, that it is complex. Just because we live in a house doesn't mean we should know everything about it, because quite often the reason we live in a house is for practical and often emotional reasons. Whereas if we're investing, we're trying to remove our individual emotion whilst tapping into the emotion of the owner-occupier for the appeal that gives us the clues as to what sort of property we should buy so that we get the better performance. So it is a bit complex. But the last point I want to say on this is, and also we are now getting used to being in an online auction environment. So if you don't like speaking in public and being in auction spaces, which I do, Ben, I love it. I feel like that's a competitive advantage that I have when I'm at an auction, but for some people it's a negative. But when you've got to understand the nuances of all these online auction platforms. So the team was riffing and workshopping one this week of one that we went through that we missed. And And what happens is the timer, the way they build in scarcity to try and attract bids for people. You know how the auctioneer does the classic going once, going twice, going three times to get you to.
Yep.
The way that it works in the online environment is probably more powerful because they've got the big things. Remember, if you don't bid, you're going to miss out. But what you don't understand is 10 minutes. And then if another bid comes in, the 10 minutes resets for someone else to have another bid. And then so this is not just the live auction, it's one of these sale by transactions.
Yeah.
And then if no one's in the 10 minutes, it then drops down to 5. And then if no one bids in the 5, it drops down to 2. But if someone in the 5 makes a bid in that, it resets another 5.
Yeah.
But if you're not experienced in that game, you could be really panicking and putting in all your bids and all that sort of stuff, which is the software desiring to do to try and hit these mental triggers.
Yeah, good.
So there is a bit going on, and Tracy, I'm conscious of the fact that we've made it sound really complex. But if we go back to your core question, you're in northern New South Wales going to Queensland auction, so you got to understand: will I be doing it face to face, or I'll be doing it online, or will they know the rules of the engagement? Do you know the rules of engagement? They're going to bring it forward. That's one. 2, make sure that you do not get your price research from the agent. You need to do that yourself. And it's really easy to do, not easy, simple to do by using some of the publicly available free information. And so therefore your goal is just to try and find out as much about the vendor as you possibly can to help you with that. So it's your second investment property. Hopefully there's a lot of experience that you've got on your first one. That will serve you on the second one, and good luck with that. And
congratulations for, if we've inspired you to take action,
bring it on.
That's a great news story. So thanks for the question, Tracy.
Good one, Tracy. All right, next one. The person didn't leave their name, Ben, but it's on SpeakPipe. It's a question about interest rates, fixed or variable. So let's go and have a listen.
Hi guys. First of all, thanks for the great podcast. I've been listening for a little while and super inspired about all the informative information. Just a quick question about interest rates and whether or not I should lock in an interest rate before planning to buy an investment property. So I'm about to buy an investment property within 3 months. What's your thoughts on locking in a fixed interest rate today rather than waiting for 3 months?
Ben, your wheelhouse here.
Yep. So remember that the fixed rate interest rates are set by the bond market and the money market. So basically what banks do very simply, and it's not as simple as this, but I'll just explain it very basically. They buy a bucket of money, they price that money, and then their desire is to sell that into the fixed market space before your mortgage then goes into variable, which they have another pricing strategy for. So depending on what's happening on the bond yield curve and in those markets will depend on how much that money costs the bank before they put their margin on it and then sell it to you. Mm-hmm. Now, at the moment, we know that the Reserve Bank of Australia has reduced the amount of bond buying that they're doing per day down to 4 billion, I think it is. I've got to make sure that's correct. I'm pretty sure it is 4 billion. And that's up until February. Now, what that is doing is basically keeping the bond pricing in check. So that money doesn't get too expensive. And so that gives us some confidence to know that if the RBA is basically pumping money into the bond markets, we would expect those yields, those rates to stay lower, which means that the fixed rates will stay lower until at least February. After February and after the economy starts moving forward, if the RBA decide to taper that, then your cost of money in the bond markets is going to go up, which means that the fixed rates have a higher probability of going up over time. So that's the sort of motherhood statement. So there's really not much to do right now. However, households, case by case example. I don't want to get into that macro conversation too often because history will tell you staying in a variable rate over a fixed rate over the longer term has in the Australian market given people more cheaper funds over the long term, because we've seen really since 1990s of those peaks, rates have just kept coming down and down and down. We've had a couple of periods of up cycles, but we never got interest rates sort of above 7.5%, 8%. So now that rates are super low, you don't want to be caught with holding high fixed rates. Now, at the moment, they're just simply not high. These are the cheapest fixed rates we've ever seen. So come back to the hedging bit. If this is a situation where you want to put some fixed rate money down, the only thing I would tell you that there's consideration is, what does that mean for your serviceability? If you're going to buy not only this one investment property, but if you're going to buy, say, another investment property in 22 months or 36 months or whatever. If you're in a fixed rate loan, it could, and it's not a given, but it could also impact in terms of moving from that lender to another lender if you need to get higher serviceability. And that is a question we simply can't answer. There is no real great way to know that. But that's why I like the idea of not doing 5 years or beyond, unless you're in sort of positions like myself, which is that property is going to sit there indefinitely. I've sort of finished my accumulation phase predominantly so I can park some money into medium to long-term fixed rates, because I like the idea of how cheap that money is over time. Now, that's not to say that I've gone and done that, but that's a choice I have because I've got a really clear line of sight. If you're really active in your accumulation phase, I wouldn't be looking at anything more than, say, 2 or 3 year fixed rates at a stretch, and certainly a hedge. We want to make sure that we've got an ample amount of variable funds that we can put an offset against to make sure that we don't get into a situation where we top out our offset account. So you always make sure you work out roughly how much savings you can make, and then give yourself another 25% stretch in terms of what that variable value will be, because you could have a windfall, you could get bonuses at work, whatever could happen. The last thing we want to be is still got a year to serve or a year and a half to serve on our fixed rate term, and our offset bucket is full. So that's why I'm always a believer in hedging and not putting everything into the fixed camp.
So Ben, some people, some of that would have landed, some people would have glazed over. So let's break down what you just said and with respect, because it's a complex subject, right? So the pros of fixing gives you certainty, it gives you a hedge against increase in rates, and you may be on a lower income, and that any movement is important. How would you summarize the cons? You talked about the fact that if it over time it's proven that it's been better to be variable. There is an offset impact that you can't offset against the fixed component, so you need to have variable. Is there any other one or two that you think that people should have around that summary?
You're also getting indications from the Reserve Bank that they're saying they don't believe that they're going to move the cash rate, which affects the variable rate, until 2024. Right? Now the markets are pricing in that movement still in late 2022, early 2023. So the markets are against the Reserve Bank at the moment. They're saying, no, we're going to have an economic rebound, and they'll have no choice. And inflation could play a role in that. Certainly, we're starting to experience a little bit of supply inflation, and now we're looking at potentially some energy inflation as well. So the markets might have an answer there, which means that would force the hand of the Reserve Governor to move the cash rate higher, and that would impact variable rates. But I still want everyone to understand, and coming back to what APRA recently did about the buffer rate and moving that higher, you should always be making sure that you're servicing mortgage rates with a 5 in front of them, even potentially a 6 in front of them, because if we are moving to higher interest rates, now in my view, they'll never get to there, but I always want to be super conservative when you're playing with other people's money. So my view is that if we do see 5% interest rates, the economy is absolutely booming. You would have to have a low 4% unemployment rate, and wage growth would be going gangbusters. That would be, or as I said, you've got this massive problem with inflation, and you're just trying to get the inflation genie back in the bottle. They're the only two scenarios that play out here in terms of really higher interest rates. But still, do your numbers on a conservative level, and that will allow you to still get into the market and buy that investment property. And as I said, have that hedge if you want to lock in some certainty for a portion of your money.
There you go. Good response there, Ben. And in terms of whether you would fix or not, Ben just gave some general advice. So if you need specific advice, go and talk to your specific financial advisor to help you with that. So
your investment saving mortgage broker should be able to give you some guidance in that space as well.
Well said. All right, next question is from Reese regarding buying from people who may be masquerading as property advisors or buyers agents. Let's have a look at this question.
G'day, Bryce and Benji, up the pies. Reese here. I just wanted to ask two questions, if that's okay. First question relates to property advisors / buyers agents. The guy who I've been recommended by a friend, I'm a bit skeptical of because he doesn't charge outright, and so takes a commission from the sale of properties, and these properties tend to be, building off the plan from developers or builders. And then the second question relates to this. He's really big on co-living spaces, for young professionals or whatever who are seeking a shared living space just because of the rental yield. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Yeah, love your show, guys. Thanks for that.
Hey, Ben, can I kick this one off? I think I've told this before, but back in 98, I started off working for a group at the time, and we were selling developers' properties. I've said that before. I've said it in the book. It's part of my past, and I've now, from 2006 to currently, I've never been involved in brand new properties, right? So I'm not talking about theory. I've seen it. I know how it works. And what I'd like to say to you, Reese, is I promise you, hand on heart, from 1998 to 2006, I actually thought I was doing the right thing by the client. I genuinely wanted to help. My heart was to make sure that they would thrive and build a portfolio and get the very best outcome. But history has proven that I was wrong. And history has also proven that those clients that I helped have done okay, because the properties have gone up in value, which I comfortably put my head on the pillow. I mean, the first property I ever helped someone buy, Ben, as a property buyer's agent, well, I thought I was a property buyer's agent at the time. I wasn't. I was a project marketer. Was $159,000 for a 3-bed, 3-bath property, right? So it's not possible for that to have not gone up in value, right? So time has been very kind, but the challenge was opportunity cost if that particular person had bought something else. So what I'd say to you here, Reese, is I've said it before, enthusiastic amateurs, I was enthusiastic. I genuinely thought I was doing the right thing. So your friend might have recommended you to someone and genuinely thought they were doing the right thing. So the way that we need to answer this is, if you were a solicitor and you were asked to do the conveyancing for the vendor, and then me as a buyer came along and I asked the vendor to ask that same solicitor to also represent me as a purchaser, they would be serving two masters. And that would make it very difficult for that solicitor, because they would have what's traditionally a conflict of interest. If something went pear-shaped in that transaction, whose back have they got? Have they got the vendor's back who's paying them money, or have they got my back because I'm paying them money? And at the end of the day, we get into a circular reference, and therefore it becomes an unresolvable conflict of interest, which therefore you wouldn't put yourself in a position where you'd have this solicitor representing. I would say that analogy is the same as what's going on here. You're putting a person in a position where they are representing the developer or the builder and wanting to, and they could genuinely want to help you, Reese. They could genuinely have a heart to help you. But the reality is they can't serve two masters. And in this case, there's not an equal master like I talked about with the solicitor example, because I'd be paying the solicitor and the vendor. In this case, you're paying the person nothing. So they're actually earning an income from the developer or the builder. So therefore, your skepticism, Ben, is well-founded, because you have an unresolvable conflict of interest where you cannot be served as the master when the developer needs to be served for that person to eat.
Bryce, I think that was beautifully said, and people should re-listen to that in terms of the way in which the market works. We work in an unregulated marketplace when it comes to direct residential property, and in Reese's case, even there are other operators out there who are trying to earn a commission. So rather than working in the client's best interest, as Bryce's intention was as an enthusiastic amateur, there are actually professional salespeople who work as property marketeers, and this is how they make a killing. And they don't just make a living, they can make an enormous amount of commissions on people who are uneducated when it comes to investing in property. Now, I'm not, by no means would we say that your friend is getting a kickback, but we also know of kickbacks and soft dollar commissions in terms, you introduce me to a mate, I'll give you $1,000, or, we'll buy some furniture for you, whatever that looks like. So we always want transparency, and the transparency should be in is how much are you making? How much, are you paying anybody else? And that full disclosure, because once you have full disclosure, if you still proceed, then it comes down to the fundamental of the investment. And at the moment, the reality of these investments are that they are going up in value too. Land is going up everywhere because there is a shortage and a large supply. And we're going to talk about more of that in what's making property news shortly. But it's just a highlight to sort of say, now, the reason why these co-living spaces are interesting is because of that yield. So you whack depreciation in there because it's brand new. You whack dual incomes or incomes like that. And on paper, this can look like a good deal. This would probably be close to neutral or positively geared. So if it's that simple, I just need to rinse and repeat 4 or 5 of these, and then I'm set up for life. However, the reality of the capital growth on these types of co-yielding property is, where does the future demand live? Is there going to be enough demand on those properties to get what we would say system growth? And system growth in the Australian property market historically for the last 40 years has been about 6%. So if you're not getting 6% capital growth year on year, now it doesn't always just happen in a linear line. You're going to have peaks and troughs in terms of that. But overall, if you look back to your past 20 or 30 years, you will find that that has been the baseline as reported by many sort of who have crunched the numbers. So anything above that is an outperforming result. Anything below that is an underperforming result. So if capital growth is the game, and that's the bee's knees of investing in property, if you're talking about the long term, because that's a life changer in terms of the value of those assets. And it also allows you to increase the rent incrementally to get a nice passive income off those properties, then these types of assets are going to underperform. So I would be saying to anyone who's looking at this is compare this type of cash flow investment, because that's what it is. It's not a growth investment, with say a really older style property in a fully developed location with full amenities, where that maybe the properties are built in the 70s or 80s and are at the same sort of price point. Well, you're going to be owning a significant more amount of land, and that has got usually a house on it. So from that point of view, that's where I would say I would probably be leaning towards the more traditional established areas where I've got that older style property and I'm pretty much just buying the land and getting the house on top of it. That's the apples for apples, because those properties will most likely be cash flow neutral or cash flow positive, depending on what level of deposit you have in terms of loan to value ratio. So that's my takeaway from this. We've always been cautious of whose agenda, what master you're serving, and I think Bryce summed that up beautifully.
Yeah, and a couple of things you talked about there are trade-offs too, Ben, because think of a granny flat, for example. If you were to put a granny flat out the back of a property, what you do is you serve the income master, and for some people that's really good, right?
That works, yeah.
But it also means the money that you spend on the granny flat at the back doesn't necessarily come into the value of the house, because the valuer doesn't recognise that at times, and so that's the sunk cost to get the extra income. But then also it can affect its saleability, because some people don't want the granny flat in the back. So if it's purely going to act as an investment and it provides the yield, because you said capital growth is the bee's knees. That is true, because the ultimate game is income. And if you serve the capital growth master first, and not always easy for everyone, but if you do, the income then becomes from a strong foundation, and then you actually live on the income. So it's all about trade-offs here. Your friend is probably incentivized to talk to you about co-living spaces, because it's probably still part of the original first question, is perhaps hazarding a guess here, Ben, where they're suggesting developer stock that has co-living. And so therefore it's still serving that circular reference.
And if they've bought one, what do you think they need positive reinforcement from their friends. Hey, I bought this. I got onto this guy. He's given me a great investment opportunity. So he's also looking for positive reinforcement by getting his mates involved. So yeah, be careful is our message there, Royce. Be careful.
Yeah. My final thing is there's currently a player for Geelong that Fremantle's targeting.
Yes.
It doesn't matter who it is, right? But
at the time of recording, that's right. Yes.
At the time of recording, but I'm torn because I'm a Freo supporter, and I live in Geelong, and I like going to Geelong games, and my eldest son follows Geelong. So I actually want the best from both. Like I genuinely want Geelong and Freo to benefit. But
let's be honest. You want him to play for Freo.
That's the point, right? At the end of the day, when you say which way you're leaning, I'm saying, all right, you've just said, Mum, I want Freo to win that negotiation, right?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
So it's a point. I raise that as a point here that as agnostic as I possibly want to be in that scenario, I'm not. I still am serving my original team's master, despite the fact that I love going and watching Geelong games with my son. So anyway, I just thought that
I like that. It was a nice little one to finish off there. I love it.
Very good. Hey, I want to shout out to Mark. I want to shout out to Tracy. I want to shout out to our anonymous speak pipe. I want to shout out to Reese to say thanks for contributing to our podcast today. Yeah, speak pipe, folks. That's where the action's at. thepropertycouch.com.au not even /, just go to the homepage. And there's a little widget there. Everyone's used to speaking online now, Ben. It should be super easy. And you can see we prioritize all the questions that come on SpeakPipe. And I'm always looking for different ones. So if you've got a little interesting angle, let us know, because quite often we've covered most of the basics. So we want to hear some nuances. Hey, my life hack today is in the current environment, Ben, what I want to do is I've got this mate. I caught up with him last night, and I thought this is really good. This is something that he's really good at. And we're chatting. We went for a walk. We talked about property. We talked about shares. We talked about business. We talked about crypto. We talked about everything, right? And that we went for a walk for an hour. Then we got back. And then the last part of the conversation, he's really good at this. He goes, "How are you really going?" I said, "Good." And then he goes, "Well, how's things going at home?" And he was very good at continuing to ask. And then we had this really life-giving conversation that went for about 20 minutes. And at the end of it, he goes, "Mate, if given the choice between all of these stuff that we were chatting about, property, all that sort of stuff, and this last 20 minutes, I'll take this hands down every day of the week." And I must admit, I felt great from the exchange. He felt great from the exchange. And then I walked away from that feeling super, right? So what my life hack here is today is, in an environment where half the country is suffering lockdown burnout, I know there's Are You OK Day. I know there's Beyond Blue. I know there's all these wonderful, wonderful organizations doing some great stuff, Ben. But just like start one person at a time. If you've got someone, see if you can just dive in a bit further. Ask them another layer, and see if you can get closer to them so that they can feel like that they're supported. And because humans crave connection, and nobody's interested in having a polarizing conversation right now where you're black and they're white and I'm purple, and like just whatever it is, just find that point of connection, because I promise you'll feel better for it. Your friend will feel better, and you're both emotionally incentivized to make sure that exchange is really meaningful as well. So that is my life hack today, is to try and, in the next couple of days, seek out one of your mates and see if you can get through a different layer, because that connection is important. Hey, Ben, what's making property news?
Well, mate, I alluded to it before in terms of, here we are with another situation in another state and territory where the developer is miraculously worked out a way, or through no fault of their own, depending on what you're talking about, has rescinded on contracts for off the plan property. So let me explain. We've talked, obviously, with 360 odd episodes, we've been here before, but we are talking about classic cases of sunset clauses and issues. And it appears that Canberra didn't have their backyard in order. And so what was traditionally a policy, so let me sort of explain this. Sunset clauses are in place on contracts of purchase for off-the-plan properties in a view to try and protect the buyer. Then in the event that the property doesn't get built within a certain amount of time, you can get your money out and then go and buy something else, right? In other words, they didn't get enough pre-sales or, for certain delays or whatever. So it protects that deposit money that you're putting down in terms of buying something off the plan. What we're seeing in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, is when the property market is moving as well as it is, and the rising tide is lifting all ships, we also see developers potentially, because I don't know the full story here, but I can only go by the news article, but developers behaving badly, potentially. So what we're seeing in this particular case is these people have bought townhouses in Canberra, and the developer has rescinded on those contracts and as effectively selling those properties for between $100,000 to $200,000 more than what they originally paid for those properties. So if that is a genuine issue because of COVID or because of supply chain issues, then okay. But I would still say, why wouldn't you honor that contract, Mr. Developer? Okay, so let's say it was delayed over a period of time. Why can't you still sell it at the price that you said that you could, that they paid for it? Why do you need to hike it up? Well, the only thing I can think of in terms of why you would hike it up is because of greed.
Yes.
And basically gross profit for you. So here we go. The ACT is now going to look at changing the laws to protect the innocent and the vulnerable, and we support that 100%. So be careful when you're buying in different states and territories. What are there, sunset clauses in the contracts, and what happens in the event that a developer rescinds that contract and then resales that property 6 months or 6 months later at a significantly higher price point? Not a good look. Doesn't pass the pub test.
No. Hey, can I give you a lived experience on that? This story I'm not proud of in terms of asset selection, but back in my project marketing days, I had a development in the north of Brisbane that I was putting investors into. I think I'd have to really stretch back to the back of my mind, but I think maybe 50 townhouses, Ben.
Yep.
And what happened is the clause had a sunset clause by June 30th. Either party could rescind, which is what you just described. And in the lead up to that, we'd had a really good success in helping investors buy into this development. But what had happened is there was a little creek that was running nearby, and underneath one of the townhouses, most of them they were all freestanding. So as far as, probably me trying to justify a little bit here, but as far as townhouse developments, it was a good one.
Like a freestanding one, if you can get it.
Freestanding. There wasn't just a big jungle, right?
Yep.
What happened is they couldn't get the certificate of titles issued because they had to actually demolish one of the townhouses, fix the creek issue, get the foundations right, rebuild it. So effectively, just imagine this whole development, including the pool and everything's done, and everyone's just waiting for this other one to be built. Council can come along, give a couple of ticks, everyone gets their title, we can all settle, get it off to the banks. Now, back in those days, we would get 50% of our commission when the property went unconditional. And mate, they didn't even go fully unconditional because the bank always used to say subject to on completion valuation. So it wasn't even technically unconditional, but every condition was satisfied except for that. Now, to give people a sense, back in the early 2000s, I was getting $15,000 commission. So we were getting $7,500 up front, and then $7,500 when it settled. And but what was happening was the market, and this was my enthusiastic amateur and ignorance and naivety at the time, the market was moving. So I was on the phone to all of the investors going, hang in there. I know this is frustrating, but the price you paid and what they're worth now, this is good news for you. Cut to the chase. The developer did exactly what you just described. They go, well, the sunset clause is now in the shadows of us. So we're actually economically incentivized to slow down. We're economically incentivized to slow down the rebuild of this property so that date comes and goes, and then either party's got the trigger to get out. And what did they do? Ben, they got out and they served their own master. And unfortunately, it's one of the reasons why we say to people that off the plan is challenging, is because you are not in control, and the contracts are like war and peace. So here's the kicker. Here's the kicker, Ben. The developer rings us and says, because I think we've done maybe 30 of the townhouses, Ben, and the developer rings and says, "Hey guys, this is happening, but to sweeten it, to soften the blow for you, we're not going to ask for the money back that we've paid you up front." That's how lucrative it was for them to not even ask us for the money back, right? And then they were prepared to pay. They asked us, we flat batted it, and they said, so then they're prepared to pay the next person full tote on commission.
Another 15,000 round to sell them at how much? What have they gone up in value?
Oh, like good question. I think they were we were purchasing them for late 2s, and then they were reselling them for the mid 3s, right? Yeah. So just so this is not an article online, Ben. This is lived experience, right?
Yeah.
So I've seen it with my own eyes. It was the beginning of the end for me. I'm thinking, this is not what I want my reputation to be a part of.
Add to that dodgy builds, fire issues, all of the risks you have when you're buying off the plan or building,
developing in individual companies, so that when that development's done, they can wrap that up and move on to another
silo the things. There's a lot of risk, people. So just be very careful when you're playing in that space. And when this is the example of where rising tide lifting all ship, and those properties have gone from, so what does it say? We purchased it for 529,000, and now now the same townhouses are now up at 749,000. So that's over $200,000 more, Miss Edgelton said. So
times that by the amount, so 200,000 times the amount in the development.
They had in them. Yep.
They don't care that they've paid the salesperson their commission back in the early days. But here's the people who signed up for the properties in the first place. They were the leverage that the developer uses to go to the bank to say, give me the money to the development in the first place. It is just utter disrespect.
Totally greed, mate. Again, we don't know the circumstances for this, but it's the one time where you can prove that some off the plan properties do actually go up in value.
Yes.
And yet you can still have the rug pulled from under you. It is poor form. Poor form on the grander scale of people. But again, what are they doing it for? They're doing it for profit. They're lining their pockets, as a means to justify. Yeah, it's unjustifiable in my mind. But anyway, that's why we do the championing for our members.
Caveat emptor, buyer beware. Out the TPC community, we want to make sure that you thrive in your portfolio building. So please heed the lessons. But been a good episode, Ben. Love it. Yep. I just want to do another shout out to our community who've made it all the way to the end, listening to you and me bang on. We want to hear your summer series stories. Go to thepropertycouch.com.au/my story. Please, if you're feeling nervous, we will look after you. We will make sure that you feel safe and comfortable, and provide an environment for you to share your story with us.
Hey, and you can even share a property story. We can mix it up. Doesn't all just have to be about money and money management.
Well, ultimately, it's about getting on top of your money so that you can leverage into some form of wealthier tomorrow. So we definitely want to talk about the property side of it, but it's all about tidying up the house, making sure that you trap more surplus first, build on a foundation of stone, so that then you can leverage into something that is a good news story for you. Hey, mate, it's always good to hang out with you.
Love it, mate. Love it. Thanks very much.
Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
There you go, folks. See you next week.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1. Because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to propertycouch.com.au/fast track. You will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. To thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.